Welcome back. In part 1, we dug deep with Dr. Matthew Lamanna about, well, digging for dinosaur bones. He took us on a tour of his major discoveries around the world. And don't let him downplay it. They were major, and there have been many. In part 2, Matt and I make delicious discoveries. While we didn't get a chance to name them, we reveled in our good, delectable fortunes, nonetheless. While our restaurant, Legume, is sadly closing, relegated to an entry in the annals of badass history not unlike the dinosaurs, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History is open, or at least it will be after the COVID-19 crisis comes to an end. As for our dear Dr. Lamanna, he is a paleontologist and the principal dinosaur researcher at the Carnegie Museum, here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, for my favorite part of the intro, sorry, Matt, take a look at this. Sweet potato ravioli. This rooted take on a classic dish is incredibly authentic. The dough is handmade, hand-pressed, and checks all the boxes one comes to expect fresh, lovingly crafted pasta to check. This creamy, yet decadently dense autumnal dish featured rich and savory flavors. Once they're cut into pocketed pillows of they are boiled, sautéed in a bath of brown butter and sage, and plated with sautéed kale, then topped. Insane. I love ravioli, especially this ravioli. Now let's continue our conversation with Dr. Lamanna, or as I've come to call him, my friend Matt. I'm Jay Mays, and this is SEARED. Amazing food, remarkable people. So we talked a little bit about motivation already. We talked about hard work and that sort of thing. But there's a do what you love what you do element to your background, I'd say.
For sure.
Yeah. How do you, there's always those moments of difficulty, like you mentioned in Antarctica and not finding something. There's always those moments of struggle. How do you work to triumph over those things? Like, what's your mentality to do the next thing after a failure? Or how do you keep your motivation?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, I wish I could tell you there was some kind of magic solution to that.
We don't expect magic and secrets.
Yeah, I think you just have to go into it knowing that, whenever you try something, you have the risk of failing. There's a famous quote that my buddy Ken Lacavera, who's a dean at Rowan University in New Jersey, and a longtime collaborator of mine, he attributes this to Wayne Gretzky, and maybe it belongs to Wayne Gretzky.
Right.
But apparently Wayne Gretzky said something to the effect of, all the shots I never took didn't go in.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be prepared to take those shots.
Yeah.
And understand that sometimes you're going to miss, and sometimes the goalie's going to block you.
Right.
And so I think you kind of go into it. You have to go into it knowing that you're not going to win them all, and you've got to be able to dust yourself off and get back up and try again.
Is that sort of a humble toughness?
I think it makes you, I would say I've gotten more resilient over time. I've developed maybe a little bit of a thicker skin than I had before.
Yeah.
And I think that's an essential thing in our field. We're trying to make discoveries, we're trying to advance knowledge, and we're not always going to be right.
That's a great point.
I often tell students and interns that I work with, I have the privilege of, I get to sort of mentor undergrad interns and volunteers sometimes, usually from local universities, but sometimes from elsewhere.
Yeah.
And one of the things I tell them a lot is that in paleontology, the only way that you can avoid pissing somebody off is to do nothing. And even then, there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
So you're always going to, whenever you put a new idea out there, chances are it's going to be an idea that's differed from somebody else's idea, or it's going to be a fossil that somebody else is working on something really similar and they're pissed off that they got scooped or whatever it might be.
Right.
You have to know that whatever you do, even if you do the best you can, whatever you do, you're probably going to be subjected to criticism.
Right.
Thankfully, a lot of times it's friendly criticism, it's constructive criticism. Sometimes it isn't, and you've got to learn to, to shake it off, so to speak.
You say learned skill, and I want to pick up on having that as a learned skill, but I think there's a couple beers ready for us if you're...
Nice, yeah, sure.
So we got the same one, so cheers to that.
Cool.
So yeah, tell us, I mean, you mentioned resilience earlier, but it's not a natural, like you weren't born with this shell of resilience.
No, I am not a naturally resilient person, I don't think.
It's a learned skill?
Yeah, I think so. And I wish I could tell you I was like a master at it. I'm not. I do think, I'll use one serious example and one ridiculous example to illustrate this, but the serious example is that I, like a lot of people, I've gotten into meditation a lot recently. Not even recently, within the past 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
You beat the trend if it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, for sure it was 5 years ago. Yeah, at least. Actually, earlier than that. I remember doing it as early as 2008, 2009, something like that.
10 years.
Yeah.
You really beat the trend. you set the trend.
There's incredible value. I find incredible value in it, and I find the great lesson for me is I'm tenacious. I grab onto something and it's hard for me to let go. Like I'm meticulous. I want everything to be perfect.
Yeah.
And what meditation has taught me is that it doesn't have to be that way. And that ultimately, the things that we make into a big deal usually aren't a big deal. And the things that, the worst fears that we articulate for ourselves in our minds hardly ever come to pass, and it's been very, very good for me to try to learn to let go. And I think that's made me a happier person, and I think as a result, a more productive person.
Does it result in reduced anxiety about things you can't control?
For sure. Okay. For sure it does. Again, I wish I could tell you I never experienced that sort of thing.
Sure.
I do.
I mean,
we all do, exactly. But I think it does help you realize that these fears that you have, these anxieties you have, are fleeting. That they're nothing lasts forever, and that eventually things will either get better through work of yours or on their own, or they'll resolve themselves. Sometimes a lot of things that you fear kind of resolve themselves on their own, and learning to let go of the worry, let go of the fear. Is a constant process, but it's one that I feel like I'm maybe better at than I was 5 years ago.
Through a lot of hard work and effort.
I actually enjoy it. I really love it.
Some people starting out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of effort into making it a habit, and there's a lot of effort into quieting your mind, I'd say.
But I wouldn't even call it, the spirit of meditation for me isn't necessarily to quiet your mind.
Interesting.
It's to observe what's happening in your mind. And
interesting.
Some days when you're meditating, you'll have a very quiet mind, and other days you'll have a very noisy, jumpy mind that wants to jump all over the place to random thoughts here and there.
Right.
The thing, I think sometimes when people start meditating, they get a little bit scared by that. Holy crap, this is going through my head.
Yeah.
But that's all part of the process, and it happens to everybody as far as I can tell. And you just become sort of accustomed to what's happening in your head when and maybe where some of these fears and anxieties and other unpleasant things are coming from.
Yeah.
And that when you get to that sort of when you experience that for yourself for a while, I think it becomes easier to disregard your fears and let them go.
Interesting. So it's really self-awareness?
Yes, I would say so, for sure.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, it's not really even about trying to change anything.
No.
It's about just observing and being comfortable with what you observe. So I sound like a lot of my my sort of teachers now, but yeah, I think
it's learned experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we do that. I mean, we want to communicate to everyone out there who's watching this, the things they're experiencing probably aren't unique, and there's people who have worked through them in a lot of different ways.
Yep.
And we should talk about that.
Yeah, and I think it is fair to say that I've had to work through a fair bit of anxiety to get where I am and things like that, and I like to make that clear to people because it shows them that, you know, I mean, if I can do it, you can too.
Yeah,
and that
some sort of lit pathway.
Exactly. It doesn't have to rule your life. You know, it doesn't, and, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you've traveled the world, and travel is anxiety-provoking for some people. You've interacted with a lot of different people, and interacting with a lot of different people is anxiety-provoking to some people. You've taken steps into the void for the sake of your career and the sake of discovery, and that's anxiety-provoking for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So just hearing the process of self-awareness and kind of what you go through to achieve that is impressive. It's interesting.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I the reason I share that is because I do want people to realize, you know, I know that there are people out there that are fascinated with paleontology, and they, you know, they probably think that none of us, you know, those of us that have quote unquote made it, don't experience these kinds of things, but pretty much all of us do.
All of us do.
And you just, you know, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be easy. You know, most of the time it won't be easy. But you know, you power through, you keep going, and you let go of the negative shit.
Yeah. I think we should end that section right there. Like, I love that. Life is never going to be perfect. Life is never going to be easy. But you power through, keep going, and let go of the negative shit. Friends of SEARED, that is wisdom to live by. Put it on a pillow, perhaps post it on Insta with a sunrise in the background. But whatever you do, share it and live by it, and attribute it to Matt.
The ridiculous example I was gonna use is that so I grew up in upstate New York, and I came here to Pittsburgh without a hockey team or a baseball team, and so I've adopted the Pens and the Pirates. I regret to some degree adopting the Pirates, but they gave us a few good years a few years ago, so that was nice. And the Pens are perennially contenders, so that's pretty easy to root for.
Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah, exactly, and Evgeny Malkin, who incidentally came to the museum for a tour one time.
No
Super
kidding.
Fun, yeah. But growing up in upstate New York and being a massive fan of football, I naturally have a favorite football team.
Not the Steelers?
And it's not the Steelers, sadly. It is my beloved Buffalo Bills.
Okay.
And being the ridiculousness of this is my brother and I joke, my brother's at least as big of a fan as I am, we joke that being Bills fans has made us resilient. Because, you know, the team's biggest claim to fame is getting to 4 Super Bowls in a row and losing them all.
And losing all of them,
and since then, they've been a study in mediocrity. They went 17 years without making the playoffs. They finally made the playoffs in 2017, thanks to Andy Dalton for the Bengals completing a prayer to receiver Tyler Boyd, who actually went to University of Pittsburgh, incidentally, and beating the Ravens in the last game of the season in 2017. This year, the Bills are 5-1. And so we're all crossing our fingers.
Is it going to last?
We're all crossing our fingers that they stay winning, that they keep winning. They're not going to, of course, win every game that they remain, but we're hoping that they'll make the playoffs and maybe do some damage in the playoffs this year.
We filmed this episode at the tail end of 2019. At that point, as Matt said, the Bills were 5-1. They finished the remainder of their games 50-50. 5 wins, 5 losses. And while they did eke into the playoffs, they were promptly ousted by the Houston Texans in a frustrating overtime loss. Matt, the Bills continue to help you build your resilience. You're speaking to a Detroit Lions fan who in recent memory, the Lions went 0-16 and have always been ousted in the playoffs, you know, after one playoff game. So I feel that pain.
Yeah,
of a Bills fan.
I think that there's something to be said for people that are fans of bad teams. I mean, some people would say we're crazy.
Yeah.
You know, what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And my wife always likens my affinity for the Bills to this like horrible relationship that I'm in, like where, you know, like the girl will like kind of tease me and be like, I want you back, and you know, I miss you and I need you, and then she'll like break my heart and dump me and sleep with my best friend or something.
Bills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think it's easy to be a Patriots fan. It's easy to be a Yankees fan.
Yeah,
it's difficult to be a Lions fan. It's difficult to be a Bills fan. And so when I meet somebody else who's a fan of a team that has a similar legacy as my own beloved bills, it increases my respect for them.
You empathize with that.
I do.
That relationship.
I empathize and I also respect because it's easy to jump ship, I think.
Yeah. I have a good friend who's a Patriots fan, and I hope he watches this.
Yeah, I hope he does too.
You out.
Yeah, exactly. And incidentally, if you hadn't knocked out Josh Allen with an illegal hit, we probably would have beat you.
There you go. Thank you. Well, this has been awesome. Cheers.
Cheers.
To all of you diehard Patriot fans or Yankees fans, you heard the man. You've got it easy. That means you, Scott. I know nothing about ducks, so I'm just going to pull from
Well, so it's actually ironic that we're eating this because ducks are one of the more, if I can avoid grossing you out with a little bit of phylogenetic talk here.
Yeah, that's fine.
Ducks are one of the most archaic living lineages of birds. They're what we would call one of the earliest branching groups of birds.
Okay,
so
gotcha,
they branched off the bird evolutionary tree not
nice.
long after birds evolved, well, millions of years, but relatively speaking, not long after birds evolved.
Yeah.
And so, in an evolutionary sense, they're some of the most dinosaur-like birds that are alive today.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Duck-leg confit. Let's just watch the process of creation for this decadent dish. Enjoy. You must remember this in
This is great too.
Your career, but the pivot, like we've seen recently, the pivot to feathers. Mm-hmm. We've seen the pivot to birds as descendants. Mm-hmm. Like that wasn't pop culture knowledge when Jurassic Park came out. We knew they were kind of bird-like. Yeah, but it wasn't. We weren't having that conversation. Like it was.
I think that the first Jurassic Park, feel like came out in 93 maybe. Yeah.
Yep.
Around that time, the dinosaur origin of birds was gaining lots and lots of traction, but it was certainly not universally accepted.
Right.
And so, in a way...
I should get peppers and rice.
Sure, yeah. Was it couscous or something?
They listed 2 rices, one from North Carolina and one was a safarito.
Oh, no way.
But I thought it was couscous too when I first saw it.
Yeah, no, actually, now that I look at it, the grains are a little longer.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park in some ways was prescient in that they did go out on a limb and endorse the sort of birds came from dinosaurs idea.
Right.
The last scene of the movie, which again I didn't remember the first time I saw it, but the last scene of the movie is a bunch of birds flying away from the island, is poetic or whatever. And only a few years later would the first feathered dinosaurs be discovered, beginning in China in the mid-1990s, a couple of years after Jurassic Park came out. And that was, for a lot of people, the kind of final piece of the puzzle, so to speak, like the one that sealed the deal that birds were descended from dinosaurs.
Was the first the hip shape, like the hip facing, or were there other components? Like bone density and sizes and things like that.
Sure. So things like hollow bones have long been known to be common to dinosaurs and birds.
Right.
One of the major advances was the discovery of wishbones in dinosaurs. Okay. So birds are the only living group that has a wishbone. A furcula is the technical name for it. Mm-hmm. And so the way that we paleontologists reconstruct evolutionary relationships is we look for features, we call them synepomorphies. They basically is a long word to mean 2 things that are shared that aren't that are an evolutionary novelty. They're a new thing that's appeared on the evolutionary tree.
Whereas like something like eyes has evolved like 7 times.
Exactly.
Right.
So eyes are something that we would call a homoplazy, an independently acquired character.
Right.
If you graded on eyes, then then those little salamanders that live in caves that have lost their eyes would be less closely related to humans than squid would be.
Right.
And
who
so
have evolved their own eyes.
Right, exactly. That seem to have evolved their own, their eyes on independently of the vertebrate eye, the backbone animal eye. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs in the 90s showed that feathers, the sort of maybe most remarkable avian evolutionary novelty, the most birdy of bird characteristics, first appeared in dinosaurs. And that, for a lot of people, was the final piece in the puzzle that said, okay, this is the group. Yep, exactly. I often liken it to, sometimes in science, discoveries are subtle. They're hard to, it's hard to kind of put the pieces together. Every now and then a discovery comes along that smashes you over the head with a 2x4 and says, this is the answer. And this is
clear.
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift, right? Like before you looked at it one way, and then after you were like, oh my gosh,
that is partly true. Like, as people have realized the dinosaur-bird connection, we've started to see that the evidence was there all along in some ways.
Isn't there recently... So, I know this broadly from a headline and a little bit of reading, but I don't know the details of it. Essentially, lizard-hipped, the ornith group, and then the bird-hip group, where it was like 2 on one side of the branch and 1 on the other, and then someone recently classified it where there was 2 on the other side of it. It was like sauropods and theropods. You can describe much better than I
to
can.
back this up a little bit, to give context, so there are 3 main groups of dinosaurs.
Right.
There are sauropod dinosaurs, there's a long-necked, long-tailed, plant-eating variety. There are theropods, which include all predatory dinosaurs.
Right.
Oddly, not all theropods are predators, but that's another story for another time. But every meat-eating dinosaur you've ever seen belongs to the theropod group, so we generally refer to them as meat-eating dinosaurs. And then there's a third group that includes everybody else. So that would be things like Triceratops and Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, all these other kinds of plant-eating dinosaurs that don't fall under the sauropod umbrella.
What is that group called?
Called Ornithischia.
Okay.
This is what you were talking about.
That's what I said.
So
exactly.
Traditionally, there's been a dichotomy between sauropods and theropods on one side, and ornithischians on the other.
Right.
And so sauropods and theropods have traditionally been grouped as another group called Saurischia. So Saurischia is meant to encompass sauropods plus theropods. And it's meant to be the sister taxon, the sister group of ornithischians. Recently, first I'll explain the origin of the names. So Saurischia means lizard hip. Ornithischia means bird hip. And that's because the paleontologist that gave these things their name back in 1887, a paleontologist named Harry Gouvier-Seeley, in 1887, looked at dinosaur hip structures and said some of them have lizard-like hips and some of them have bird-like hips. This is a very unfortunate historical accident. That's because important. As it turns out, the lizard hip group, theropods, are the group that's thought to have given rise to birds. Ornithischians are a side branch that has nothing to do with bird evolution. They just, through convergent evolution, the same process that yielded the squid eye versus the vertebrate eye, they developed a pelvis that's similar in shape to that of birds.
Interesting.
And it has nothing to do.
Evolved.
Exactly, independently evolved. And so the rearrangement that you're talking about is that fairly recently a bunch of paleontologists in England, very, very excellent, renowned paleontologists, took another look at the early history of the dinosaur evolutionary tree, and they did another one of these evolutionary analyses where we're looking for these features that certain groups share that others don't. These evolutionary novelties or synapomorphies. And when they ran the whole massive data set through a computer, they got a result that nobody had gotten in many, many years, or almost never gotten, although it had been obtained in the distant past. And that's that ornithischians, these bird-hip dinosaurs, are more closely related to theropods than either are to sauropods. So under this new rearrangement, basically, there would be sauropods on one side and what we call ornithoscelidans, the group that includes ornithischians plus theropods on the other side.
So it's theropods that move from one side to the other. So the meat eaters, essentially, right?
Yeah, or you could, I'm trying to think like how best to explain this, but I would argue, yes, exactly, yes. That's the best way to explain it, is theropods moved from being the closest relatives of sauropods to the closest relatives of ornithischians.
So it's not ornithischians pure, it's the new group that you had just labeled.
Ornithoscelidans, but theropods are still thought to be the most closely related to birds.
It didn't add any sort of direct descendancy to ornithians.
No, it really has.
But it just related the two.
Exactly, yeah. So we don't. nobody thinks that ornithischians gave rise to birds.
Right.
That being said, some people now think they're more closely related to theropods than sauropods are.
Sure.
This is
Is this artificial or is this important?
Well, so the discussion itself is important for our understanding of early dinosaur history, but it has very little to do with the origin of birds. That's still nested. You'll use a pun, but people use that all the time.
Yeah.
People refer to evolutionary relationships as nested relationships. Birds are firmly nested within theropods, and I think it's almost impossible to imagine something that would change that.
Yeah.
The idea so the Ornithoscelida debate is more of it's a debate about how dinosaurs came to be and how the evolutionary steps they took in their earliest stages.
Right.
It's not fundamental to the origin of birds.
Gotcha.
And
Is it taxonomically important?
Yeah, it is important for taxonomy of dinosaurs.
Okay, yeah.
And from that standpoint, it's important for understanding, the evolutionary phases they went through, the earliest history of their evolution, which is important for understanding them as a group.
Yeah, sure.
I'll conclude this discussion by saying that far from everybody believes that Ornithoscelida is the correct answer, and a lot of people still adhere to the quote-unquote traditional idea of sauropods and theropods being more closely related to each other than either are to ornithischians.
Gotcha. That's fascinating. Does the new class does the new proposed grouping lead to more research avenues along those lines? Like you're looking for some closely related species?
It does, actually. So one example of that is there's this really, I think we've talked a little bit about how, there are new dinosaurs discovered relatively frequently, and that sometimes these are dinosaurs that even those of us that think about dinosaurs all the time never saw coming.
Right.
One of these was a dinosaur that was discovered in the late 2000s, finally given its name in 2015. A dinosaur from Chile called, predictably, Chilesaurus.
Not Glidosaurus?
No, not Glidosaurus.
Which, by the way, you mentioned and still cracks me up.
Small ornis. If my buddy Jerry Harris ever watches this, he'll get this reference. But Chilesaurus was named in 2015, and if you're looking for like a dinosaur to make a toy out of, this is not the one. It looks really vanilla. Like it looks like kind of like a weird little sauropod or something.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been that big. Doesn't have big teeth. It's not scary. No spikes on its head. Whatever.
Right.
All these things that sell toys.
The blandest
It
dinosaur.
is. But when you look at the details of this thing, it looks like it came from outer space.
Is it like the duck-billed platypus of the dinosaur?
In some ways, yeah. And so people have had a really hard time figuring out what the hell this thing is. I think the general consensus is that it's some kind of theropod that went off on its own evolutionary pathway forever ago and ended up evolving all these really unusual features.
Yeah.
When you look at the details of the skeleton of this thing, it's crazy.
Huh.
But one thing that the Ornithoscelida idea has sort of raised is that there are a couple of paleontologists at least, the people that proposed Ornithoscelida in the first place, have argued that maybe Chilesaurus is a late surviving descendant of the earliest Ornithoscelidon. In other words, it's kind of half theropod, half ornithischian, and in some ways its anatomy bears that out. In some ways, I think the idea that it's some kind of weirdo theropod is still far more likely in my mind. Okay. But the idea of Ornithoscelida has led to new interpretations of this previously existing dinosaur.
Yeah, because essentially you had this dinosaur that was pretty hard to classify, but this new light was shed where, we can relate these things. And then if you look at it through that lens, you're able to say, well, potentially, those relationships matter and are represented within this late species through potential early development correlations.
Yes, exactly.
Huh.
Yeah. It's important to remember that almost all that we quote unquote know about dinosaurs is a hypothesis. So, so I can tell you for sure that Tyrannosaurus rex lived in what's now Western North America, and it lived there during the late Cretaceous period. I can
how big its head was,
exactly,
that sort of thing. All of those quantifiable details.
Exactly, but most of the questions people want to know about dinosaurs are the ones we know the least about. So like behavioral questions,
Yeah,
or
sure.
even who's related to who is still
Yeah.
an open question a lot of the time, and even
Right for research.
Yeah, and what the ornithoscelida thing shows us is that the most fundamental things we think we understand about dinosaur evolution and dinosaur paleobiology and all these other things,
Yeah.
because really everything hinges on evolution.
Yeah.
They're even still open to question.
That's
So
good.
and I think the important take-home message there is
Yeah.
that if there's someone out there that wants to be a paleontologist, that's an aspiring paleontologist, there's going to be so much to learn and know and discover
Right.
long
And
after
rediscover
I'm
and re-know
gone.
and-
Yeah, exactly. So like it's a field where there's the pace of discovery is incredible, and people are still finding things that nobody ever imagined.
Gosh, that's motivating in and of itself.
Yeah,
Like you have a
yep.
chance to discover within this field.
Totally. Yep.
Well,
yep.
I think we should probably go to the museum and hang out there for a little while. You up for that?
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. You can take it all. We'll just reset the whole thing.
I'm not a server.
I might like put my face on it after we're done.
You might what?
I might just scarf it after we're done.
Oh yeah,
It's
we
so
can
good.
do that. Yeah.